Welcome, sleepy soul. I'm your storyteller, your quiet companion for tonight's dark and chilling journey. So dim the lights, get comfortable, close your eyes, and let these terrifying stories slowly pull you into sleep. If you're still awake in the next 5 minutes, I'll be surprised. But before we begin, tell me down in the comments, which city are you listening from tonight? And what horror topic should I cover in the next video? Now relax and let the nightmares begin. I don't know if I believe in curses. I always thought that kind of thing was reserved for old stories, the kind you hear around campfires when you're too young to understand the true weight of fear. But after what happened to me, I'm not so sure anymore. My name is Emily. I was 23 years old when it all began. I live in a small town, nothing special, just a quiet place on the edge of the city. I worked as a barista at a little coffee shop on Main Street, and I spent my days pouring lattes and making small talk with regulars. I lived alone in a small apartment above a thrift shop, a place that was never noisy, never crowded, just a calm little refuge from the world. I'd always been a fan of antiques. It wasn't anything too out of the ordinary, really. I liked the idea of things having history, a past, something that had been loved before I came along. I had a small collection of vintage items, old postcards, a couple of clocks, some books with yellowed pages. And of course, I had the doll. It was an antique doll I'd picked up at an estate sale a few months before everything started. It was the kind of doll you'd see in an old movie, soft, porcelain face with delicate hand-painted features, long, wavy hair. She had a little pink dress that looked like something straight out of the 1800s. I could tell she wasn't a mass-produced item. Something about her felt different. I liked that. I put her on a shelf in my living room. She was beautiful, and I liked the way she looked with the sunlight streaming through the windows, her face just slightly tilted to one side, her glassy eyes catching the light. At first, nothing happened. Life went on as it always did. Work, coffee, quiet evenings with a book, maybe a glass of wine now and then. But then, one night, I woke up to something strange. It was just after midnight, and I had been sleeping soundly when I heard it, whispering. At first, I thought it was a dream. The kind of dream that's just vivid enough to wake you up, but not vivid enough to make sense of. I rolled over in bed, rubbing my eyes, but then I heard it again. A soft, almost melodic voice whispering my name. Emily. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't some random noise from the building. It was distinct, like someone was standing in the room, just out of sight. My heart started to race, and I froze, straining my ears, waiting for the voice to come again. But nothing. Silence. I figured I must have been dreaming. I tried to dismiss it, but something gnawed at the back of my mind. Something felt off. It felt like I wasn't alone in my own apartment. I turned on the lamp beside my bed, the dim light spilling out into the room. I glanced around. Nothing seemed out of place. The doll was still on her shelf, right where I'd left her, her blank eyes staring ahead as always. But something in my gut told me that something wasn't right. I tried to go back to sleep, but the feeling didn't leave me. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But it didn't. The next morning, I laughed it off. I'd been working long shifts at the coffee shop, and maybe I was just overtired. I told myself it was nothing. I went to work, did my usual routine, and by the time I got home that evening, I had all but forgotten about the strange whispering. That is, until the next night. It happened again. I woke up in the middle of the night to the same whispering sound. Emily, a little louder this time, more insistent. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of street lamps outside. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I got out of bed and walked into the living room, my bare feet cold on the hardwood floor. The doll was still on the shelf, but this time I noticed something different. Her head was turned slightly to the left, as if she had been looking at me while I slept. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had definitely left her facing forward when I put her there. I reached up to adjust her, but when my fingers brushed against her porcelain face, I felt something strange, a faint warmth like she'd been touched recently. I pulled my hand away quickly, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't explain it, but the doll felt alive. That night, I couldn't sleep at all. I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sounds. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you think something is hiding in the silence. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand. It was almost 3 a.m. The air in the room felt thick, suffocating, as though I were being watched. Then I heard it, a creak. The sound of something shifting, moving, just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, straining to listen, but the sound didn't come again. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my pulse thudding in my ears. Slowly, cautiously, I got up and tiptoed toward the door. I opened it just a crack, peering out into the living room. The doll was gone. My heart stopped. The shelf where I had placed her was empty. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and stepped into the room. There was no sign of her. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to check the hallway. I walked slowly, my legs feeling like lead, every step heavier than the last. When I reached the end of the hall, I saw her. The doll was sitting on the floor, just outside the door to my bedroom. Her glassy eyes seemed to glint in the dim light, her little pink dress rumpled as if she had been moved. I picked her up with trembling hands, my breath shallow, my thoughts racing. This was impossible. I hadn't touched her. No one else had. But there she was. That night, I decided I had to get to the bottom of it. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I knew something was wrong. The next day, I went to the antique store where I'd bought the doll. The owner was a woman in her late 60s, kind but always a little distant. I asked her if she knew anything about the doll's history, anything that might explain why it was moving. She gave me a strange look, her eyes narrowing. "Where did you get it?" she asked. I told her about the estate sale, about the old house in the woods. Her face paled, and she took a step back, her hands shaking slightly. "You shouldn't have bought that doll," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's part of a collection made by a man named Jacob Greaves. He was a doll maker, a very talented one, but he was strange. He made more than just dolls. He trapped souls inside them." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Trapped souls?" I repeated, incredulous. "What do you mean?" She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Jacob Greaves believed he could capture souls and keep them alive in his dolls. They're cursed, every single one of them. They're alive and they're hungry. They seek vengeance. I could feel my stomach churn, a wave of nausea rising in my throat. This couldn't be real, but the terror in her voice made it hard to dismiss. She lowered her voice. "I don't know who told you about the doll, but if you've bought one from that collection, you need to get rid of it. Immediately. Before it's too late." I didn't know what to say. The room felt cold, and I felt a knot tightening in my chest. I had to leave. I turned to go, but as I walked out of the shop, I felt a sudden weight in my hand. The doll. I hadn't realized I was still holding it. When I got home, I did what the shop owner had suggested. I packed the doll into a box, sealed it tight, and left it on the porch. I called a friend to come pick me up, to take me somewhere, anywhere away from that place. But the next morning, when I returned, the doll was back on its shelf, staring at me with those empty eyes. I wish I could tell you that it ended there, that I figured out a way to break the curse. But I didn't. The doll stayed, and each night, it whispered my name, drawing me closer to the darkness. Sometimes, the scariest part isn't what's happening to you. It's knowing that you can never escape. The dolls are always watching, and one day they'll come for you too. The doll maker's curse is real. Story 2. I was 13 this summer. I first noticed the toy shop. I don't know how I missed it before, but one evening, it just appeared in our town. It wasn't big, but it was big enough to catch my attention. The sign was bright, old-fashioned, with faded gold letters spelling out, "Toys for the Imagination." An odd name, considering we didn't have many toy shops in town. But looking back, I probably should have known something was off from the start. It wasn't just the name that struck me. It was the way it sat on the corner of Main Street, like it had been there forever, despite nobody ever having seen it before. There were no flyers or ads for it, No word of mouth. And the street wasn't exactly bustling. I mean, the town is small, almost too small for anything to be hidden for long. So seeing this shop out of nowhere, it didn't sit right with me. The first time I passed by, I was on my way home from the library. It was about 8:30 p.m., and the town was quiet as usual. The windows of the shop were dark, but the lights inside cast strange shadows, like the toys were waiting for someone. I paused at the door, half tempted to step inside, but something stopped me. Maybe it was just the chill that ran through me, or the unnerving feeling that the toys were staring back at me, even though I couldn't actually see them. I remember turning away and shaking my head. It's just a store, I told myself. But later that night, when I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the whole thing was wrong. The next day, I saw the shop again. I was walking with my best friend, Josh, and I pointed it out to him. He had never noticed it before either. We stood in front of the glass window, peering through. The toys on the shelves were normal. Dolls, action figures, stuffed animals, and toy cars. All the usual stuff, just like any other store. Still, something about the way they were arranged, the way the shadows seemed to move even without any real light, felt strange. We stared for a moment, and then I did what anyone would do when confronted with something eerie. I turned and walked away. Josh wasn't as cautious as I was. "We should go inside," he said with a grin. "Come on, it's a toy store. What's the worst that could happen?" I told him I'd catch up, but honestly, I wasn't so sure I wanted to go in there. Josh wasn't the kind of guy who was easily scared, and his curiosity usually led him into trouble. But I gave in. The next evening, we stood in front of the door, staring at it like we were about to enter some forbidden place. The bell above the door chimed as we walked in. The air was cool, but it didn't feel fresh, like the kind of air you get in a store that's been closed up for too long. And there was an odd scent, too, like old dust mixed with something faintly metallic. The store was quiet, too quiet, except for the soft rustling of the toys on the shelves. The shelves were all packed, and the display looked almost too perfect, too deliberate. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking a bit. No answer. But then a man appeared behind the counter. He looked older, maybe in his late 50s, with a long white beard and a weathered face that seemed like it had seen things I couldn't understand. He gave us a slow smile as though he'd been expecting us. "Welcome," he said in a voice that sounded too soft, too measured. "Are you looking for something specific?" I glanced at Josh, who seemed oddly unfazed by the whole situation. No," I said. "Just looking around." "Take your time," the man said, his smile never fading. "Everything here is special." Josh nodded and wandered toward the back of the store, his curiosity already getting the best of him. I stood frozen for a second longer, watching the man behind the counter. I don't know what it was, but the way he was looking at me made me feel like I was being studied, like I was part of some experiment. But I shook it off. It was just a toy store, right? I decided to follow Josh. The farther we moved into the store, the more uncomfortable I felt. The toys, at first glance, seemed harmless. But when you looked a little closer, it was as though they were alive in a way. Not moving, not really, but something about them just felt wrong. The dolls had wide, vacant eyes. The stuffed animals were too still. The action figures were off. Their proportions were slightly wrong, their joints too stiff. The toys weren't right, but I couldn't exactly put my finger on why. Josh didn't seem to notice, of course. He was already rummaging through a bin of old toy cars, laughing about some joke that I didn't quite hear. I kept walking around, trying to ignore the uncomfortable sense of being watched. That's when I noticed it, a small door in the far corner of the shop, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. It was a door I was sure hadn't been there earlier, when we first walked in. It was half open, with just a sliver of darkness beyond. I turned to Josh, about to say something, but when I looked, he was standing still, staring at something, or someone. I followed his gaze to a shelf where a doll was sitting. It was an old-fashioned porcelain doll, one of those creepy ones with the glassy eyes and the frilly dress. But this one wasn't quite like the others. Its head was tilted unnaturally to the side, and its eyes, they weren't blank like the others. They were watching. I felt my stomach drop. "Josh," I said quietly, my voice suddenly hoarse. "We should go." But Josh didn't hear me. He was moving closer to the doll like he was hypnotized. I wanted to stop him, but for some reason I couldn't make my legs move. Then I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible sound, like a low growl, coming from behind the shelves. I froze. Josh didn't seem to notice. He was now reaching for the doll. His fingers brushed against its cold porcelain skin. That's when the lights flickered. For a split second, everything went dark. The growl grew louder, and then a scream. Not from Josh, not from me, but from the toys. I don't know how to explain it, but as the lights snapped back on, the toys had changed. They weren't the same anymore. The stuffed animals were twitching, their bodies jerking like something inside them was trying to escape. The dolls were staring, their eyes wide and unblinking, as if they were alive. And the toy cars, now scattered across the floor, had their wheels spinning, but they weren't moving. They were waiting. Josh was still standing by the doll, but now it wasn't just an ordinary porcelain doll. Its smile had stretched unnaturally wide, its eyes narrowing into something malevolent. I grabbed Josh's arm, pulling him away from the shelf. "Let's go! Now!" But when we turned to leave, the door was gone. The exit was sealed shut. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to find another way out. I pushed against the walls, thinking I had to be imagining things, but no matter where I went, the door was still gone. The only way out was through the back, the small door I'd seen earlier. We ran toward it, but when I reached for the knob, I heard a voice behind me. "Leaving so soon?" It was the shopkeeper. He was standing there, just inside the darkness of the back room, watching us. His face had twisted into something that wasn't quite human anymore, and I realized in that moment he was no longer the man I'd seen earlier. I reached for the door, but Josh was already ahead of me, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. The toys, they were moving. They were coming alive, twisting into monstrous versions of themselves. The stuffed bear's face had split open, revealing sharp teeth. The doll's porcelain had cracked, revealing flesh underneath. I pushed the door open with everything I had, and we ran. We didn't look back until we were outside. We didn't stop running until we were far, far away from that shop. I don't know what happened in that store. All I know is that it disappeared the next day. No trace of it. The windows were bare, and the sign was gone, as if it had never been there in the first place. I've never told anyone what happened, not even Josh. But I don't need to. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, waiting, watching. And sometimes I swear I hear a growl just before I fall asleep. So listen, if you ever see a toy shop appear out of nowhere, and if the toys seem a little too lifelike, do yourself a favor and keep walking. Trust me, you don't want to know what happens when they come alive. Story 3. It's funny how you can think you know a person, or a thing. For most of my life, I thought I knew what I was dealing with, my job, my apartment, my family, my routine. Everything was safe, ordinary, predictable. But sometimes, it's the things you least expect that can turn everything upside down. I'm Jason. I'm 34 now, but this happened when I was about 28. At the time, I was living in a small apartment in Brooklyn, just me and my dog, Charlie. I worked at a small theater down the road, a job that I really didn't expect to be doing forever, but it paid the bills. I was a stagehand, nothing glamorous. I'd help set up, take down, move props, make sure the lights were right. It wasn't a bad gig, just repetitive. But the thing that changed everything? The puppet. I didn't think much of it when I first saw it. It was just one of those weird things that popped up in the storage room one day, tucked in a dusty corner behind a pile of forgotten props. At first glance, it looked like any ventriloquist's puppet, old but not ancient. It had that kind of worn look, like it had been loved once and then forgotten. Its clothes were faded, its face cracked in places, and one of its eyes had a weird, almost haunting tilt to it. But, I didn't think much of it. Just another prop. I should have noticed it then. Anyway, it wasn't until the boss, Vince, asked me to bring it up to the theater's main storage room that things started getting strange. "Can you take the puppet up to storage?" Vince said one day, his voice that usual gravelly tone. "We don't need it anymore." but it's too good to throw away." I gave him a strange look. I didn't remember the puppet being part of any show we'd done recently, but I shrugged it off. "Sure, no problem." I didn't think much of it, at least not until I started moving the thing. It was heavier than I expected, and it felt wrong, like there was something off about the way it was made, the way it felt under my hands. I thought maybe it was just my imagination. It was an old prop. It had been tossed around enough to be a little worn. But then something happened. I was halfway up the stairs to the main storage room when I heard it. A whisper. I froze, clutching the puppet a little too tight. The whisper was faint, like someone calling your name from far away. It was soft, but there was a sharpness to it, a kind of coldness in the air around me. "Jason." I shrugged it off. I mean, who wouldn't? It was late, the building was quiet, and maybe I was just hearing things. But then the whisper came again, a little louder this time. "Jason." It was the puppet. The voice, it was coming from the puppet. I turned, my heart pounding. But the room was empty. No one there. I stood there, holding the puppet, feeling like I was losing my mind. The whisper stopped. I didn't know what to do. I stood there for a second, just breathing. "Stop being an idiot," I muttered to myself, trying to shake it off. I placed the puppet in the storage room and locked it in. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went back to my work, trying to forget about it, but I couldn't. The next few days, I started noticing little things, things that shouldn't have bothered me, but for some reason they did. It was like there was this strange tension in the air when I passed by the storage room, like someone was watching me. I ignored it, but then one night, a few weeks later, I stayed late to clean up after a show. I was the last one in the building. As I walked past the storage room, I swear I heard the puppet. "Jason." It was faint, but it was enough to make my skin crawl. My heart was pounding in my chest. I walked over to the storage room, almost against my will. I unlocked the door, and that's when I saw it. The puppet was gone. I stood there, staring at the empty corner. The dust where it had been gone. It was like it had never been there, like it had somehow slipped out of existence. I searched the room, but nothing. I told myself I was being stupid, that it must have fallen or someone moved it. Maybe one of the other guys had grabbed it for some reason. But when I went to ask them, no one knew where it was. That's when the nightmares started. At first, it was subtle, just little things like flickers of light in the corner of my vision. Shadows that didn't belong. But then, it got worse. The puppet started appearing in my dreams. And in those dreams, it wasn't just sitting there silent. No, it was alive. It was moving. And it was whispering, always whispering my name. "Jason, come closer." Every time I woke up, I felt like I hadn't truly escaped. Like I was still there, trapped in that dream. But it wasn't just in my dreams anymore. I started hearing it during the day too. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. It was the stress of work, maybe. Or maybe it was just the apartment. But no, it wasn't. It was real. I heard the puppet's voice again. But this time it was different. It wasn't whispering from a distance. It was right next to me. "Jason, come play." I spun around, panic rising in my chest. The apartment was empty. Charlie, my dog, was staring at me like I was crazy. But no one else was there. That's when I found the note. It was tucked under my door, handwritten in messy, jagged letters. "You're mine now." At first, I thought it was just some weird prank, some twisted joke. But then I saw the puppet again. This time, it was in my apartment, on the couch, sitting there, staring at me with its cracked smile and one crooked eye. I knew then, something was wrong. The puppet, it wasn't just a puppet. It was alive. I started seeing things I couldn't explain. The puppet would disappear, only to show up somewhere else. Sometimes it was in my kitchen, sometimes on my bed. I could hear it whispering to me, urging me to do things. Bad things. Dangerous things. It started with little things, like moving things around, shifting objects, making me do things I didn't want to. But then it escalated. One night, I woke up to find myself standing in front of a mirror, holding the puppet in my hands. I don't remember getting up, but there I was. My hand was moving the puppet's mouth, making it talk, even though I wasn't controlling it. It was saying things I didn't want to hear. Terrible things. "You know you want to," it said in its low, raspy voice. "You know what you have to do, Jason." I tried to fight it, but every time I tried to resist, the puppet's grip on me got tighter. My body wasn't mine anymore. It was like it was taking over, forcing me to perform these strange, awful acts. I tried to tell myself I was crazy, that I wasn't really doing this, but I was. And then it started with other people. It didn't just control me. It controlled anyone who came in contact with it. I invited a friend over one night, Mark, from work, and the puppet was there, sitting on the couch like it had always been there. Mark didn't think anything of it. He just thought it was a creepy prop, until he picked it up. The moment his hands touched it, he froze. His eyes went wide, and his face paled. I could see it. He could see it too. He could feel it. And then, just like me, Mark started to do things he didn't want to do. He was forced to act, to speak, to move, like the puppet was controlling him. It didn't just stay in my apartment. It followed us, moving from place to place, controlling anyone who came into its path. I knew I couldn't escape it. I had tried everything, destroying the puppet, burning it, throwing it away, but it always came back. Like it was waiting, biding its time, getting stronger with every person it claimed. And now, I'm not sure how much longer I have. The puppet's grip is tightening. It's only a matter of time before I do something irreversible. I should have thrown it away. I should have burned it when I had the chance. But now I'm trapped, just like everyone else it's claimed. So, if you ever come across a puppet with that crooked smile and those eyes that seem to follow you, don't touch it. Don't let it near you. You might think it's just a toy, but it's not. Story 4. I don't know how to start this without sounding like I'm making it up. It's been years now, and I still don't fully understand what happened. But I need to tell someone. Maybe getting it out there will finally make sense of it all. Or maybe I'm just hoping it'll make me feel less alone in this weird, twisted thing that happened. So, let me start with a little context. I'm Jake. At the time, I was 29, living with my wife Claire and our 2 kids, Liam, who was 6, and Ava, who was 4, on the outskirts of a sleepy little town in Ohio. We lived in one of those old, brick houses with creaky floors and a dusty attic you never really go into unless you absolutely have to. I was your typical suburban dad. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which, on most days, meant that life was just a bit boring. Routine, predictable. Some people hate it, but I liked it. There's a comfort in normalcy, right? A peace that comes with knowing exactly what to expect each day. But things started changing that spring. Not in any obvious, dramatic way. It wasn't like one morning we woke up and noticed something had changed, but looking back on it now, I can't ignore that the weirdness started just around then. It all began when we were cleaning out the attic. I know. It sounds like the beginning of a bad horror movie. But trust me, at the time, it was just a weekend chore. Spring cleaning. Claire was downstairs with the kids, and I decided I'd tackle the attic. It had always been a catch-all spot for old boxes, forgotten furniture, and other odds and ends we didn't need. I started shifting through things. Old clothes, dusty photo albums, boxes full of books I forgot I even owned. Nothing too exciting. But then in the far corner, behind a stack of old chairs, I saw it. A wooden box just sitting there. It was small, maybe about 2 feet long, and painted a faded, peeling red. The kind of thing you'd find in an antique store, or in a garage sale, you know. A bit worn, a bit rough around the edges. I wasn't sure what caught my attention first, the box itself or the fact that I didn't remember ever seeing it before. I could have sworn we hadn't owned it. My mind was just on the task at hand, so I shrugged it off and pulled it out. The moment I touched it, something in me froze for a second. I can't really explain it. It wasn't a chill or a shiver. It was more like a hesitation, like I wasn't supposed to open it. But of course I did anyway. Inside the box were several handcrafted toys, little wooden figures, strange and abstract shapes that didn't quite look like anything familiar. There were tiny animals, but not quite right. One of them had too many legs, another had its eyes placed wrong. The craftsmanship was oddly perfect, though, as if someone had spent a lot of time making them. At first glance, they didn't seem sinister. But when I picked one up, I noticed that they felt heavy in my hand, almost as if they had been carved from something other than wood. Like bone, maybe. I don't know why, but I decided to take the box downstairs to show Claire. She laughed when she saw it, calling it a quirky antique. And that was that. We put it on a shelf in the living room and kind of forgot about it for a while. But then things started happening. The first thing was Liam. He started playing with those toys. We didn't think much of it. Kids love weird, little things like that. But there was something off about how he played with them. It wasn't like his usual games. He'd sit there for hours, talking to them in a way that made me uneasy. It wasn't the way a child would pretend with their toys. It felt almost real, like he was interacting with something else. One night, after Claire put the kids to bed, she came to me looking pale. She told me that she had heard Liam talking in his room, but not to anyone she could see. She thought it was just him being his usual self, playing, maybe even making up an imaginary friend. But then she heard him mention something strange. "He's here. He says it's time," he said. At first, we laughed it off. Kids say weird things all the time. But it felt different, and Claire didn't look like she was laughing. The second strange thing happened about a week later. I was working late one night, and Claire and the kids had gone to bed. I was in my office, the room at the back of the house. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I heard footsteps. I assumed it was just one of the kids getting up for a glass of water, so I didn't think much of it. But then, as the footsteps grew louder, I realized they were coming from upstairs. Now, our bedroom was at the front of the house, and Liam's room was across the hall from ours. This wasn't the sound of little feet. It was heavier, more deliberate. I froze, listening. The footsteps came closer, and then stopped right outside my office door. I waited. Maybe it was Claire, or maybe even one of the kids, but I knew deep down it wasn't. I opened the door and looked out, but there was no one there. I didn't feel relieved, though. I felt a cold rush of unease. Something wasn't right. The next day, when I went to check on Liam, he wasn't in his room. I found him sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the little wooden toys from the box. He was whispering, rocking back and forth. I couldn't make out the words at first, but then I heard something clear. "He's here. We can play now." I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening, it had something to do with those toys. But I didn't know what. That's when things started getting worse. The toys weren't just toys anymore. They started to move on their own. At first, it was small things, just one of the little figurines shifting positions when no one was touching them. But then the events grew more intense. One night, I woke up to the sound of scraping. It was like nails on a chalkboard, but worse, closer. I followed the sound and found myself in the living room, where I could hear it coming from the toy box. I opened the box, half expecting to find something like a rat or some other animal making the noise, but there was nothing in there except the toys. And then I noticed something terrifying. The toys were all facing me. Every single one. Just staring up at me, eyes wide and unblinking. I remember the feeling of cold sweat running down my back as I stepped away from the box. I wanted to leave, to run, but something kept me frozen in place. I reached out, and for some reason, I picked up one of the figures. As soon as I did, it felt like the air around me changed, thickened, a weight. I dropped the toy immediately, but the damage had already been done. That night, I woke up to the sound of a child crying. It wasn't Liam, though. It wasn't Ava either. The voice was strange, foreign, distant. And it wasn't coming from inside the house. It was coming from outside. I went to the window and looked out into the night, but I didn't see anything. Just the usual dark, quiet street. Then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. A shadow. Small. Moving. A child, standing in the middle of the street. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell Claire about it. I didn't want to seem paranoid. But the feeling of something wrong never left. A few days later, the last straw came. I woke up to find the toy box in the middle of the living room floor, its lid wide open. The toys were scattered everywhere. And in the middle of it all, in red crayon, There was a message written on the wall. "He's coming for you." That's when I finally realized. It wasn't just toys. It wasn't just my imagination. Something dark, something old, something tied to this house was awake. And it wasn't leaving. I had to get rid of the box. But the thing is, I couldn't. It wouldn't let me. No matter where I tried to hide it, the box always found its way back. We left soon after that, moving to another house. A safer place. Or at least, that's what I thought. But every now and then, when I'm home alone at night, I swear I can hear the sound of small footsteps. I can hear them moving just outside my door. And sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I feel like there's someone or something watching me. Waiting. Sometimes, I wonder if we'll ever truly escape it. Or if it's just waiting for the right moment to find us again. All I can say is this. If you ever find something old, something dusty, hidden away in your attic or your basement, don't open it. Don't touch it. And for God's sake, don't let your kids play with it. Story 5. I've been hesitant to tell this story, but I've been carrying it with me for years. It's one of those things that never really leaves you, no matter how many times you try to push it down. I've had enough time to reflect on it, to get over the worst of the shock and the fear, but it still sticks with me like an itch I can't reach. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see tiny little plastic soldiers standing in the doorway. But let me backtrack. I wasn't always the kind of person who'd have an experience like this. I didn't grow up in some creepy house or on a cursed piece of land. My family wasn't into the occult, and we certainly didn't collect any strange antiques or anything. We were just like any other family in the suburbs. Mom, Dad, my younger brother Ben, and me. Pretty normal, right? I was 13 at the time, and life was pretty uneventful. My biggest worry was school, getting good grades, hanging out with my friends, getting on my parents' nerves. Typical stuff. It wasn't glamorous, but it was comfortable. Even a little boring. We lived in a small house on the edge of town, a place you'd drive by without thinking twice. One of those neighborhoods where the grass is always neatly trimmed and the houses all look almost identical, like they were part of some suburban factory. The sound of lawnmowers, kids playing outside, and dogs barking filled the air every afternoon. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. I can still remember the way the house smelled, like fresh laundry mixed with coffee, the kind of scent that made you feel safe, like everything was just the way it was supposed to be. My room had posters of video games and comic book characters on the walls, and a small bookshelf filled with books and action figures. I spent most of my time in there, playing with my toys or reading. It was one of those toys, a set of plastic soldiers, that would eventually change everything. They weren't anything special at first, just little green army men, the kind you'd find in a toy store for a couple of bucks. I don't even remember where I got them. Maybe it was a birthday present or something I picked up at a garage sale. There was a whole bunch of them, soldiers with rifles, some crouching, some standing, all lined up neatly in their little plastic bag. I'd always been a fan of action figures, and these little guys were no different. They were my soldiers, and I was their commander. For months, I would set them up in different formations on the floor, make them battle each other, and create elaborate scenes where they'd conquer cities or fight off aliens. I could spend hours doing it, but at some point, I stopped caring about the soldiers. I don't know why, but they just sort of faded into the background, like everything else in my life at that age. One day, though, something changed. It was a rainy afternoon, one of those dreary days when the sky is a dull gray, and the sound of raindrops hitting the window becomes a constant hum. I was bored, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore my mom calling me down for dinner. She had asked me to clean up my room, and I remember groaning as I stared at the mess. The toy soldiers were still scattered across the floor, their little plastic limbs twisted in odd angles. I was about to shove them into their old bag when something caught my eye. It was a piece of paper, yellowed and folded into a tiny square. I had no idea where it had come from. It wasn't there the night before, and I hadn't seen it earlier in the day. I picked it up, unfolded it, and read the words written on it in neat, looping handwriting. When you say the words, the soldiers rise. Bound by an oath, they fight and never die. I remember feeling a chill crawl up my spine, but at the time, I just thought it was some stupid joke. Maybe a note from one of my friends trying to mess with me. But for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. Something wrong. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I kept the paper with me, tucked away in my desk drawer. I didn't know why, but something about it stuck with me. It wasn't until the next day that things really started to get strange. I was sitting on the floor, fiddling with my soldiers, arranging them in lines and pretending they were at war. I was thinking about that weird note, and I don't know what came over me, but I recited the rhyme aloud, just to see if anything would happen. I didn't believe it, of course, but I said it anyway. When you say the words, the soldiers rise. Bound by an oath, they fight and never die. At first, nothing happened. I laughed to myself, shaking my head at how ridiculous it all was. I was about to go back to my game when I heard a sound. It was faint, like something skittering across the floor. I looked down, half expecting to see one of my toy soldiers had fallen over. But they were all still standing perfectly in place, right where I'd left them. That's when I noticed it. The tiniest movement, almost imperceptible, but it was there. One of the soldiers, the one in the middle of the group, had shifted slightly. I stared at it, heart pounding, unsure of what I was seeing. It was as if it had moved on its own. I reached out and touched it, just to make sure it wasn't some trick of the light or my imagination. But the moment my fingers brushed the plastic, I heard a faint creak, like something was shifting beneath the floorboards. I froze. The soldier wasn't in the same position anymore. It had changed. The arm that had been straight out was now bent at an angle, as if it had been in the middle of aiming its rifle. I was too stunned to do anything. I could barely breathe. My mind raced. Had I really seen that? I grabbed the rest of the soldiers and placed them back in their bag, trying to calm myself down. I told myself it was nothing. It had to be. Toys don't move on their own, right? But the next morning, they were out of the bag. I found them all on the floor again, arranged in a perfect line as though they were waiting for orders. And this time, I didn't have to recite the rhyme. I ran downstairs, telling myself I was just imagining things, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My parents didn't believe me, of course. Mom just told me I was probably sleepwalking, and Dad joked that I'd been watching too many action movies. But I knew something was happening, and I was scared. Over the next few days, the soldiers began to change. They started to get bigger. Not physically, but in a way that made them seem more lifelike. Their stances became more aggressive, like they were ready to fight. Their eyes seemed to gleam with some kind of dark purpose. At night, I would hear strange sounds from my room. The sound of boots marching across the floor, the scraping of tiny plastic limbs dragging. I'd run into my room to find the soldiers had moved again, this time closer to my bed. They were no longer playing at war. They were preparing for something. And then one night it happened. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hall. But it wasn't my parents. It was the soldiers. I could hear them, no longer tiny plastic figures, but something else. They were real now, marching through the house in their miniature army formation. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them from my bed, too terrified to move. I don't know how long it lasted. It felt like hours. I watched as they marched through the house, disappearing down the stairs and out of sight. When I finally mustered the courage to leave my room, I found the front door wide open. The soldiers were gone. The next morning, my parents were frantic. The house was a mess. Chairs had been knocked over, tables overturned. The front door was wide open, as if something or someone had left in a hurry. But there were no signs of anyone breaking in. I never found the soldiers again. They were gone, all of them. But I never forgot that night. And here's the thing. I've moved on with my life, tried to forget about it, but every now and then, I'll hear a sound, a small creak in the house, a faint scrape of plastic on the floor. And I wonder, did I really get rid of them? Or are they just waiting for me to say those words again? Sometimes I think they never left, and that's the scariest part of all. Story 6. I've been trying to figure out when things started to go wrong. It's hard to pinpoint the exact moment, but if I had to choose, I think it was when I got that bear. I was 17 at the time, living in a small suburban town. Nothing too exciting happened there, and that's how I liked it. Life was predictable and safe: school, friends, a part-time job at the local bookstore, and a mom who was always there when I needed her. My dad had passed away when I was little, so it was always just the two of us. For years, everything felt solid, like it could never break. But then one day, everything shifted. I remember the day so clearly. It was late September, and the air had that crisp, almost electric feel to it, the kind that comes right before autumn truly hits. The sunlight was fading early, the streets quieter, almost as if the world was preparing for something. I didn't know it yet, but that day would mark the beginning of a nightmare I'd never wish on anyone. I came home from school, dropped my bag at the door, and walked into the living room. That's when I saw it, on the couch, sitting right there as though it had always been there, a teddy bear. It was a pale blue color, with soft fur that looked a little too old, a little too worn, like it had seen more years than any bear should. But there was something else about it, something that felt off. Maybe it was the way its eyes seemed to gleam in the light, or the way the stitching on its mouth was slightly crooked. I couldn't explain it. I just knew that it wasn't a normal bear. "Mom!" I called, but no one answered. I frowned, walked over, and picked it up. That's when I noticed the tag, faded and frayed, but still legible. "To Emma with love. Always and forever, Mom." Emma. That was my mother's name. I stood frozen for a second, my heart racing. My mom had never mentioned this bear before, and I couldn't remember ever seeing it in our house. But there it was, and it had my mother's name written on it. I felt my skin prickle, but I told myself I was just overreacting. It was probably just something my mom had kept from when she was younger. I shrugged it off and took the bear upstairs to my room. I set it down on my bed and sat beside it, staring at the thing, feeling this odd unease settle in my stomach. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept tossing and turning, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that the bear was watching me. It was ridiculous, I know, but the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling became. Around 2 a.m., I heard it, a whisper. Soft at first, like it was too far away to understand. But as I strained my ears, I could make out the words. "Emma, you don't remember, do you?" I shot up in bed, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was still, except for the faint rustle of the leaves outside. I blinked, disoriented, and then I glanced over at the bear sitting on my nightstand. It wasn't possible. I had just imagined it, right? I shook my head, trying to calm myself, but then I heard it again. "Emma, you're the one. You're the one who has to finish it." My blood ran cold. I didn't know what that meant, but there was no mistaking the voice. It was coming from the bear. I jumped out of bed and grabbed it, tossing it onto the floor as if that would somehow stop whatever was happening. But the whispers continued, growing clearer, almost urgent. "You know what you have to do. You know who you really are." I stumbled back, my head spinning. I was terrified, and I didn't know why. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just a bad dream. I turned on the light and took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But the next morning, things only got worse. I kept hearing the whispers, faint but persistent. Sometimes it was in the background, like a shadowy presence behind me. Other times, it was right there in my ear when I was alone in the house. I tried to ignore it, but it started affecting my thoughts. At school, I couldn't focus. I couldn't stop thinking about the bear and the strange things it had said to me. What did it mean? Why was it talking to me like that? And then one evening, I noticed something. The bear seemed to be in a different position every time I came into my room. It was like it was moving on its own, shifting ever so slightly. Sometimes it was closer to my bed, other times further away. At one point, it was sitting right at the edge of the bed, as if it had been waiting for me. I asked my mom about it. "Hey Mom, do you remember this bear? The one with the tag?" She smiled, but it was a bit forced. "Of course I do. It used to be mine when I was a little girl. I kept it for a long time, but I thought you'd like it now." I didn't know why, but something about her response felt off. It didn't sound like she was lying, but there was a hesitation in her voice, something I couldn't quite place. That night, the whispers came again, but this time they weren't as soft. They were louder, clearer, and they were telling me things I couldn't understand. They were talking about my family, about secrets that I didn't know existed. "Your father wasn't who you think he was," the bear whispered. "Your mother is hiding things from you." I froze. My dad had died when I was little, and I had always believed it was just an accident. But now I wasn't so sure. What was the bear trying to tell me? I started doing some digging. I found old photographs, newspaper clippings, anything I could get my hands on. It didn't take long before I found something that made my stomach turn. A picture of my dad, standing next to a woman I didn't recognize. And the date on the back, just a few months before he passed away. It was like the world had tilted on its axis, and I was falling into a place where nothing made sense anymore. But the bear, it knew. It knew these things, and it was trying to make me see them. Days turned into weeks, and I began to feel like I was losing my mind. The whispers weren't just whispers anymore. They were commands, pulling me in different directions, telling me to do things I wouldn't normally even think about. I couldn't tell anyone. My mom didn't seem to notice anything was wrong, and my friends, well, I couldn't bring myself to tell them. It felt too insane, too unbelievable. And every time I tried to push the bear away, it only seemed to grow stronger. It was when I began to feel like it was controlling my thoughts that I knew something had to be done. But by then, it was already too late. The bear had already seeped into my mind, its whispers becoming a constant companion. I began to question everything, my memories, my feelings, my relationships. Was I really Emma? Was this really my life? The bear told me things I didn't want to hear, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. Finish it. It's time to make everything right. What did that mean? What was I supposed to do? I don't know if I ever really figured it out. It's been months now, and I'm still haunted by the bear. It's in my room, staring at me, waiting. I haven't been able to get rid of it. Sometimes, I think I hear it whispering even when I'm awake, telling me to do things, guiding my actions. And now, I'm not sure who I am anymore. Am I still Emma, or have I become someone else entirely? Maybe I'll never know. But I'm telling you this because I don't want you to end up like me. Don't ever accept a gift like that. Don't ever let it in. It's not just a bear. It's a trap. And once it has you, it doesn't let go. Story 7. You know those things you hear about in passing? The stories people whisper about in old towns, or the kind of tales you'd hear from your grandparents that sound too strange to be true. I'm sure you've heard your share. But this story, it's different. It's something I lived through. Something that still makes me check the corners of rooms and lock the doors before bed. And it's about something we all think we understand, toys. I wasn't always a believer in strange things, but that all changed when I was about 12 years old. It wasn't a supernatural encounter or some monstrous creature from the depths. No, it was much, much worse. It was a man. My name's Alex, by the way. I was just a regular kid living in a small town. Not a big city, just a suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened and everything was safe. School was easy, I played soccer on weekends, and life seemed pretty standard. That's the thing about small towns. You start to think nothing can go wrong because it's too normal. Everyone knows each other, the weather's always predictable, and you'd think that nothing out of the ordinary would ever break through that calm facade. But sometimes, there's something lurking beneath that calmness. Something waiting for the right moment to show itself. For me, it all started when my younger sister, Ellie, got sick. I remember that day so clearly. It was a Tuesday, one of those crisp autumn days where the sun is still shining, but you can feel the chill in the air. Ellie had been coughing for a few days, but my mom didn't think much of it. She thought it was just a cold. But then Ellie didn't get better. She got worse. One evening, her fever spiked to a point where my mom panicked. I remember sitting in the living room, playing with my Legos, trying to focus on the simple pleasure of building a castle. But my mom kept running back and forth between the kitchen and the living room, her face pale, eyes frantic. I heard her talking to someone on the phone, but I couldn't make out the words. That's when the idea came. I don't know why it even occurred to me, but it did. There was an old man in our town, a toy maker, who who was known for making the most lifelike dolls you'd ever seen. I'm talking about dolls that looked like they could blink and speak. People in town used to say that he could make wishes come true. He had some reputation, but they also said there was a cost. Always a cost. I didn't believe any of it, of course. Who would? Wishes and toys making them come true. It sounded like something from a fairy tale. But I figured, if anything, it was a long shot that could help Ellie. I had heard my mom talk about him before. His name was Mr. Roscoe, an eccentric man who lived at the far end of town, in a little cottage tucked away behind the woods. It was always quiet there. In fact, I'd never even seen him outside much. I guess I didn't have much to lose, so I convinced my mom to let me go. She was too busy trying to find a way to get Ellie to a doctor, so she didn't even notice me slip out the back door. I still remember the walk. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the street. The trees rustled in the breeze, and I felt an odd chill in the air. The further I walked, the quieter the town became. It was almost like something was waiting, holding its breath. When I reached the cottage, I hesitated. The house was small, with overgrown ivy creeping up the sides. There were old wooden toys in the windows, dolls and wooden soldiers that seemed to watch me as I stood on the doorstep. I knocked. The door creaked open after a long moment, revealing a man who seemed older than time itself. His hair was wild and white, his face wrinkled and tired, but his eyes, they were sharp. Too sharp for someone his age. "Can I help you, boy?" he asked, his voice raspy but warm. I need help," I stammered, feeling a lump form in my throat. "My sister Ellie, she's sick. They don't know what's wrong. I heard you could help." Mr. Roscoe studied me for a moment, as if he could see straight into my soul. Finally, he nodded and stepped aside, letting me into the dimly lit room. It was unlike any other house I had ever been in. The walls were lined with shelves full of toys, dolls, stuffed animals, wooden trains. But none of them looked normal. They all had an eerie, lifelike quality to them. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me as I moved. "I can help you," Mr. Roscoe said, his voice quiet. "But it comes at a price." I didn't care. At that moment, all I wanted was to make Ellie better. I nodded without hesitation. He led me to a small workbench in the back, where a doll sat. Its eyes were wide open, its face frozen in an innocent expression. The doll was perfect, almost too perfect, like something out of a dream. "I'll make a wish for you," Mr. Roscoe said. "But you must remember this. Wishes are not without consequences. They always come with a price, a trade. You will have to give something up." "I don't care," I said quickly. "Just make my sister better." He smiled, a strange, knowing smile, and nodded. That night, when I got home, I didn't think much of it. I didn't tell my mom about the toy maker or the doll. I just held the doll in my hands and whispered my wish. "I wish for Ellie to get better," I said, my voice shaking. And then I went to bed. The next day, something strange happened. Ellie's fever broke. She started feeling better. But I didn't tell anyone about the wish or the doll. It was a small miracle, and I thought I had done something right. I figured I could leave it at that. But the doll, that perfect little doll, stayed with me. At first, nothing changed. Ellie got better, she went back to school, and life seemed to return to normal. But then things began to shift. Little things, unsettling things. I started to notice that the doll, no, the toys in my room, were never in the same place. One night, I swore the doll was sitting on my dresser, staring at me. The next morning, it was on my bed, its eyes wide open, as though it had been watching me sleep. I tried to ignore it. After all, I had wished for Ellie to get better, and she did. I was convinced it was just my imagination running wild. But then, a week later, the dream started. I woke up one night to the sound of whispering, soft voices calling my name. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the doll was sitting at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. I tried to push the feeling away. I really did. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent. One night, the doll was gone. I searched the whole room, but it wasn't there. Then the next morning, it was back on the dresser. But this time, something was different. It had a note in its hand. More wishes. Or else. The words were scratched into the paper with shaky handwriting. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. That was the moment I knew something was wrong. But it was too late. I didn't tell my mom. I couldn't. I didn't want her to know. And deep down, I knew that the toys, the dolls, they weren't just innocent objects. They wanted something from me. As the days passed, things got worse. The dolls began to appear in places I hadn't left them. More notes. More demands. The toys started talking, their voices low, like whispers in the dark. And the worst part, it wasn't just the doll anymore. It was all the toys, every single one in my room. More wishes, they said. We need more wishes. But I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what they wanted from me, what they were capable of. And then Ellie, my sister, started getting sick again. Worse than before. That's when I realized the truth. The toys, Mr. Roscoe's creations, had come to collect. The first wish had been paid, but it wasn't enough. They wanted more. I tried to make another wish, but it wasn't enough. The toys kept demanding more. Until one night, when I woke up to find all of them gathered around my bed. The dolls, the wooden soldiers, the stuffed animals. Give us your soul, they whispered in unison, or we will take what you love. I didn't know how to stop it. I couldn't. I had made a deal with something that wasn't human, something I couldn't control. But I'll tell you this, I never went back to Mr. Roscoe's cottage, and I never, ever made another wish. The dolls? They're still here, still watching me. I don't know how much longer I can keep them at bay. So if you ever find yourself in a small town, in a quiet place with strange rumors, remember this. Don't make deals you don't understand, because the toys, they never forget. Story 8. I never thought a teddy bear could ruin my life. But here I am, sitting in the dark, heart pounding, staring at it across the room, and I know it's not just a stupid childhood toy. Not anymore. I'm not sure where to begin this story, because honestly, I don't even know if I should be telling it at all. Part of me wants to forget everything about that stupid bear, bury it deep, like I used to bury my fears when I was a little kid. But the other part of me knows that what happened, well, it's something that can't be ignored. It's real, it's terrifying, and it's still happening. I'll start with the basics. My name's Rachel, and I'm 27 years old. I live in a small apartment in a quiet part of the city. Nothing too fancy, just a place that feels like home, where the smell of coffee always fills the air, and the hum of traffic is like a distant lullaby. I work as a graphic designer, and most days my life is predictable. It's normal, almost boring really. I don't mind it. I like it that way. It keeps me grounded. Growing up, I had a pretty average life. I lived with my mom and dad in a modest house in the suburbs. Nothing about my childhood ever really stood out, except for one thing. My grandmother. She was special, not in a weird way, but there was something about her that always intrigued me. She had this way of making everything seem magical. She passed away when I was 14. I didn't take it well, obviously. She was the one who made holidays feel alive, who tucked me into bed and whispered stories about fairy tales and the strange things that could happen if you weren't careful. I always thought it was just her way of entertaining me. But now, looking back, I wonder if she knew something I didn't. When she died, I didn't expect much. I was too young to think about inheritance or anything like that. But there was one thing I inherited, and it was the thing that started all of this. A teddy bear. A small, faded brown bear with button eyes and a stitched smile. It was old. Really old. My grandmother had kept it in a glass case for as long as I could remember. She'd always told me it had been hers when she was little. It was her most prized possession, she said. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It was a toy, right? But when I held it in my hands, something felt off. It was like the bear had absorbed all the years of her love and history. But there was one thing that always stuck with me. A weird feature about the bear. It didn't make a sound when you hugged it. It wasn't like a typical stuffed animal with a squeaker inside, or even a little rattle. It was completely silent. And I'm talking silent, as if the air around it didn't dare move when you held it close. It was strange, but I shrugged it off. I figured it was just old. Maybe the stuffing had settled over time. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with that bear. And for reasons I still can't explain, I decided to keep it on my bed. That's when things started to change. At first, it was subtle. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, and I'd hear something. Whispers. Very faint at first, like they were coming from the other side of the room. But when I turned to look, I saw nothing. I thought maybe it was the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I hadn't been sleeping well lately. I blamed stress from work. But the whispers kept coming back. Every night, a little clearer. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find the bear in a different position, as if it had been moved. I'd check the window locked. The door locked. I lived alone, so it didn't make sense. But every time, I'd feel like something was just off, like someone was watching me. It wasn't until the third week that I really started to feel it. The bear was getting stronger. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was the cold feeling in the room, the way the temperature dropped when I was near it. I could feel it, pressing on my chest, suffocating me. It was as if the bear was absorbing my fear. I know it sounds crazy, right? A teddy bear absorbing fear? But that's the only way I can describe it. The more afraid I got, the stronger the whispers became. And with each hug I gave it, yes, I'll admit it, I started hugging it again because somehow I thought it would comfort me. It felt heavier, like it was feeding on me. One night, I woke up to find myself clutching it in my sleep. But this time, when I looked at the bear, I could see something I hadn't noticed before. Its eyes. They were different. They didn't look like just simple button eyes anymore. They followed me. They watched me. And that's when it clicked. The bear wasn't just absorbing my fear. It was growing stronger from it. And somehow, it was getting inside my head too. I tried to talk to friends about it, but they all laughed it off. They told me I was just stressed, overworked. They suggested I put the bear in a closet or donate it. But I couldn't. I didn't know why, but I couldn't bring myself to part with it. It felt like if I let go of it, something worse would happen. I wasn't sure if it was the bear or my own paranoia at that point, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. The breaking point came one night when I was sitting in bed, the bear beside me, staring at me with its empty eyes. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, and I swear I felt something cold breathe on the back of my neck. I jumped up, heart hammering in my chest, and turned around, but there was nothing there. That's when I saw it. The bear was moving. Just a little. I swear to you, it was moving. One of its arms was stretched out toward me, as if it were trying to reach me. I screamed and backed away, but the moment I turned my back, I felt a sharp, cold breath against my neck again. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. The bear's face was smiling. A smile that wasn't there before. I don't know what happened next. I blacked out. The next thing I remember, I was on the floor, curled up in a ball, trembling. When I stood up, the bear was on the floor, but it didn't feel like it had just fallen. It was like it had crawled there. I knew then. I knew what the bear was. It wasn't just a toy. It wasn't even an object. It was something darker, something alive. It was feeding off my terror, growing stronger with every whisper, every movement. And the more fear it absorbed, the more powerful it became. I tried to burn it. I tried to throw it away. But somehow it always came back. It always ended up on my bed, staring at me with those cold, lifeless eyes. I've changed since then. I don't sleep much anymore. The whispers haven't stopped. They follow me no matter where I go. I can hear them even when I'm at work, even when I'm walking down the street. It's like the bear is always with me. The fear is always there, waiting to feed on me. I don't know how much longer I can take it. If you ever inherit something strange from an older relative, please throw it away. Don't even keep it for a second. Trust me, you don't want to know what happens when something like that starts feeding off your fear. You don't want to know how strong it can get. I don't think I'm ever going to be free of it, and I'm not sure I want to be. Because at this point, I think I'm just a vessel for its hunger. And soon, it won't need me anymore. I just hope you never have to find out what happens when something like that is allowed to grow. Story 9. I'll never forget the day I first laid eyes on that dollhouse. It was my birthday, my 12th birthday, and my aunt, who was always the one to give me the most unusual presents, had picked it out. She was the type to give you something that seemed innocent at first, but would slowly turn into a living nightmare. I remember the morning clearly. The weather was overcast, with a light drizzle tapping against the windows of our small suburban home. I was sitting at the kitchen table, lazily stirring my cereal, the smell of toast in the air, when she showed up at our door. Aunt Molly. She was a bit of an enigma in our family, the one who always had her own ideas about things, who would show up with gifts that made my mom raise an eyebrow. I didn't know why at the time, but I think deep down, even at 12, I knew there was something off about her gifts. She never gave anything that just made sense. "Happy birthday, sweetie," she said, her voice a little too chipper as she handed me a large box wrapped in silver foil. I took it without much thought, my mind still half on the soggy weather outside. When I tore off the wrapping and opened the box, I was met with the sight of an intricately crafted dollhouse. It wasn't just any dollhouse. It was a miniature replica of our own house, down to the smallest details. The wallpaper was the same in every room, the same shade of blue my mom had picked out for the living room walls. The furniture mirrored the ones in our home, even the little things, the clock on the wall, the framed photos of our family, the carpet in the hallway. It was so accurate, it almost felt like I was looking at a perfect, tiny replica of our world. But there was something off about it. The dolls inside, with their glassy eyes and stiff poses, seemed too lifelike. Their painted faces were frozen in expressions I couldn't quite place, like they were caught in the middle of something. But I was 12 and I didn't think much of it at the time. I thanked Aunt Molly and she left as quickly as she had come. That afternoon after school, I set the dollhouse up in my room. It fit perfectly on the shelf by my window. I spent hours playing with it, imagining little stories for the dolls, creating adventures in the rooms that mirrored my own life. But as I began to settle into my play, things started to feel strange. At first, it was just a small detail. I was moving the dolls around when I noticed one of them, a woman in a red dress, was suddenly facing the kitchen in the dollhouse. But that wasn't right. I had placed her by the front door earlier, near the entryway. The small, exact replica of my mom's dollhouse was now mirroring something real. I didn't think much of it, probably just my imagination. But as the days went on, the dolls began acting out scenes I couldn't explain. I'd place them in one spot, and the next day they'd be in a completely different position, their faces twisted in ways I hadn't set them. It was subtle at first, but it wasn't long before the dolls started to reenact things that were happening in my life, things that I hadn't even told anyone about. One day, I came home from school to find my bedroom window open. I didn't remember leaving it open, and it struck me as odd, but not something that would make me jump to any conclusions. That night, as I played with the dolls, I noticed that the dolls in the kitchen were positioned in a way that mirrored my parents arguing earlier that afternoon. My mom had been upset because she couldn't find her car keys, and Dad had been pacing around the house, getting frustrated. But the dolls, when I looked at them, they were standing there, positioned exactly like my parents had been. My heart skipped a beat. The next day, my mom had a small accident. She slipped while getting out of the car and twisted her ankle. It wasn't too serious, just a sprain, but when I went to check the dollhouse, the dolls were positioned strangely again. The one in the red dress, the mom figure, was lying on the floor in the same position my mom had been lying in when she had fallen. The other dolls, their eyes fixed in unnatural angles, were standing around her staring. I couldn't explain it. I almost didn't want to. Maybe it was my imagination, but the dolls seemed to be trying to tell me something. Things got worse from there. I started to notice the dolls weren't just mimicking random events in my life anymore. They were recreating disturbing moments I hadn't told anyone about. They started reenacting the time I had gone to the park with my friend Claire, and we had both felt the eerie feeling that someone was watching us. I hadn't said a word to anyone about that feeling, but when I looked at the dolls, one of them was positioned as if it were peering out the window of the dollhouse, watching. The others were frozen in positions of fear, just like Claire and I had felt in that moment. I became obsessed with the dollhouse. I would sit for hours studying the dolls and the way they moved, trying to make sense of it. Sometimes, I even thought I could feel them watching me when I wasn't looking. One evening after dinner, I went into my room and saw that one of the dolls, the mother figure, was missing from the dollhouse. I searched the room, but it wasn't there. It was just gone. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I had knocked it over and forgotten where I'd put it. But the next morning, when I went downstairs, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There on the kitchen counter was the missing doll. She was positioned in the exact same spot where my mom had been standing earlier that morning, preparing breakfast. The doll was staring at the stove, its painted eyes unblinking, its mouth twisted into a silent scream. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told my mom what had been happening, but she just laughed it off, chalking it up to me being a little too imaginative. She told me not to play with the dollhouse too much and to focus on my schoolwork. But I couldn't stop. The dolls had become a part of my world, a strange obsession that I couldn't break free from. It wasn't until one night that things took a truly terrifying turn. I had been playing with the dolls in the dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of my nightlight, when I noticed something new. The dolls were no longer acting out my life. They were acting out something worse. There, in the living room of the dollhouse, the dolls were positioned around a small, carefully arranged table. At first, I thought it was just another weird scene, but as I leaned closer, I saw that one of the dolls, the father figure, was holding a small knife in his hand. The other dolls were frozen, as if they were waiting for something to happen. I froze. I couldn't move. I felt a strange chill wash over me. I didn't know what it meant, but I had the strangest feeling that it was a warning. That night, my mom went out to meet some friends, and my dad stayed up late watching TV. I couldn't sleep, not after what I'd seen. The dolls haunted my mind. It wasn't until the next day that I realized what had been foretold. I was standing in the kitchen, staring at the floor, when I heard a loud crash from upstairs. My dad's voice, strained and frantic, echoed through the house. I rushed upstairs and found him, standing in the hallway, staring at my bedroom door. My door was wide open, the room completely dark. I stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest, and saw what had happened. My bedroom window was shattered. Someone had broken in, and the only thing missing from my room was the dollhouse. We called the police. They arrived quickly, but there was no sign of anyone. No fingerprints, no clues, just a broken window and an empty room. My dad was livid, and my mom didn't know what to say. But I knew. The dollhouse, that cursed thing, had led them to me. Days passed. The sense of danger lingered, but no one ever found the intruder, and I couldn't stop thinking about the warning in the dollhouse. What if they were still out there watching? Months later, we moved. A fresh start, they said. But it never really felt like a fresh start. Every place we went, every corner I turned, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something knew where I was, what I was doing. And the dollhouse? Well, I never saw it again. I burned it the night we moved. I couldn't risk it being out there, waiting for the next person to fall under its curse. Sometimes I still have nightmares. I wake up in a cold sweat, and I can hear the faint click of the doll's eyes, watching me from the dark. But the scariest part of it all, I don't think the dolls ever stopped watching. If your gut tells you something is wrong, listen. It might just save your life. Story 10. I don't know why, but I keep telling myself this isn't a story I should be sharing. It's a bit too much, but I've been thinking about it lately, thinking about how stupid we all were, and how if I can just warn one person, maybe it won't happen again. Or maybe it will. Honestly, I don't know what's worse, believing it could happen again, or knowing I didn't do anything to stop it when I had the chance. Maybe you're not even supposed to know. But here we are. I guess I'll start from the beginning. I wasn't always someone who believed in curses, bad luck, or anything that felt supernatural. I was the kind of person who brushed things off. A rational thinker, right? Grew up in a suburban neighborhood, small town, boring if I'm being honest. The sort of place where people don't lock their doors, kids run around in the street until it's dark, and you can walk to the corner store without worrying about anything. I was 24 when this happened. My friends and I were still fresh out of college. I was living in a modest apartment in a building that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades, but it was cheap and close to work, so I didn't mind. I worked at a tech company. Nothing exciting, just dealing with customer support tickets and troubleshooting tech issues all day long. It was the kind of job that didn't require me to think too hard. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I had my friends, my little routine. Life felt, normal. I had 3 friends I spent most of my time with back then: Mike, Sarah, and Emily. We'd known each other since high school, and while some people drift apart, we didn't. We were one of those tight-knit groups. Most weekends, we'd end up at someone's house, watching movies, cracking jokes, and doing whatever people our age did to pass the time. Nothing ever felt out of place. Nothing ever felt dangerous. But then, of course, something changed. It all started one Saturday afternoon when Mike called me up. He was over at his parents' house, going through some of their old stuff in the attic, and, well, he'd found something. It wasn't unusual for him to be digging around in his childhood home. Mike was one of those nostalgic types who liked to sift through boxes of old junk, but that day was different. "Hey, I found something weird," Mike said, his voice low, like he was trying to sound casual, but didn't quite pull it off. "You should come over. I think you'll want to see this." I didn't know what to expect, but when Mike said weird, it always piqued my curiosity. So I grabbed my jacket, hopped in my car, and headed over to his place. When I got there, Mike was waiting in the front yard, grinning like he'd just uncovered some long-lost treasure. In his hands was an old, battered wooden box. It was small, the kind you'd store trinkets in, but this one looked different. You could tell it had been up in that attic for a long time. The wood was worn, the paint chipped, and there were odd symbols carved into the side. It looked ancient, like it didn't belong in the 21st century at all. He opened the box. Inside, there were several old toys. Some of them were things you might expect to find in an attic: action figures, stuffed animals, little trinkets. But there was one toy that stood out. It was a jester doll. I'm not going to lie to you, it was disturbing. The face was painted with bright, exaggerated features, but the eyes, they were glassy, like they were watching you no matter where you stood. The smile was too wide, almost too perfect. It was just wrong. It didn't look like a normal child's toy. It felt like something that shouldn't exist. Mike must have seen the look on my face because he laughed nervously. "I know, right? It's creepy as hell. But hey, it's vintage, right?" Sarah and Emily had come over by then, and they were poking around the box too. They didn't seem as disturbed as I was. Emily picked up a little wooden horse, inspecting it like it was a rare find. Sarah was messing with a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had seen better days. But the jester doll? No one wanted to touch it except Mike. He passed it around, joking about it being cursed, making everyone laugh. "Watch, this thing's probably got some bad mojo attached to it. Anyone who touches it is going to have bad luck." I laughed too, but deep down, something about it didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to hold it, but then Sarah took it from Mike, and she made a joke about how she was the most likely to have bad luck anyway. And then, just like that, it started. At first, it was small things. Emily's phone screen cracked that night for no reason. She hadn't dropped it or anything, it was just cracked. She joked about it being the curse, but it felt more like an inconvenience than anything else. Sarah started to feel sick the next day. Not sick enough to go to the doctor, but just off. Tired. Headaches. I remember her complaining about it, but we just shrugged it off as a flu or a cold. Mike was the first to really freak out. His car, which had been running perfectly fine, broke down on his way to work. Not in a way that made sense. He had it towed, but when they checked the engine, it wasn't just one thing, it was everything. The entire engine was shot. It was one of those things that would have cost thousands to repair. And just like that, Mike went from one of the most carefree people I knew to someone walking around like he was carrying a weight on his shoulders. By this point, we were all starting to connect the dots, but no one wanted to admit it. We were too scared to say it out loud. I remember waking up one night to the sound of scratching at my window. I thought it was just the wind, but when I checked, no one was there. I tried to shake it off, but then I heard it again. This time it was a tapping sound, like a small wooden object hitting the glass. I didn't get any sleep that night, and it got worse. Sarah, remember how she'd been sick? It escalated. She collapsed one evening in the middle of our usual hangout. Mike and I rushed her to the hospital, but they couldn't find anything wrong. They gave her some meds, sent her home, and told her to rest. But the next day she was worse. She couldn't stand up without getting dizzy, and her skin was pale, too pale. There were bruises, strange ones, around her wrists and ankles. It looked like something was gripping her. That's when the truth hit us. The toys. The jester doll. It hadn't just been a joke. It was a curse. We tried to get rid of it, tried everything, burning it, burying it, leaving it at a church. But no matter what we did, it came back. And each time it came back, it brought more misfortune. More accidents. More unexplained injuries. Eventually, Sarah, she didn't make it. It was the kind of thing you never expect to happen to someone your age. Especially not Sarah, who had always been so full of life. She just collapsed one day, and that was it. Gone. I still don't know if I believe in curses, or if we were just incredibly unlucky. But after that, I started noticing things. Things I couldn't ignore. The jester doll. It was back at Mike's house, right where we had found it. And I'm pretty sure it was looking at me. I've had nightmares since then. Nightmares about the toys, about the jester doll, about what might have happened if we hadn't touched it in the first place. I don't know why I'm sharing this. Maybe it's because I'm hoping someone will listen. Maybe it's because I want to warn you about things that seem harmless at first. Maybe it's because I've learned the hard way that sometimes the things we think are just toys are far more dangerous than we could ever imagine. And if you ever come across something like that, something that just feels wrong, don't touch it. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more stories that might just keep you up at night.